Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Good
How are
morning,
you?
Pastor Jeff. Life is good. Here we are. It is Thursday morning.
We made it through the chocolate.
We made it through chocolate. It was Mother's Day this past Sunday,
Yeah.
everybody. Yes, so happy post-Mother's Day now, and now it's all about Father's Day.
Father's Day.
I'm
Hot
gonna go there.
dogs. Hot dogs.
Hot dogs. It's going to be so good.
I love
Hot
I love a good hot dog.
Yep, and that'll be coming up in a number of weeks here.
Yeah.
But this past Sunday we were talking about the illustration, or rather, an illustration of folly, as
Yeah.
we've been continuing through our Jude sermon series. It's called "In His Grip."
Yeah. All comes back to when he talks about we're beloved and we're kept. You know, so we're kept right here. We can't be snatched away, as they say. So
Thank God.
hallelujah.
Right. Yeah, maybe even by our own choices. I don't know, but today we're going to be talking a little bit about choices, everybody. And this is because in this previous Sunday sermon, Pastor Jeff disclosed to us three decisions or three choices that we need to make in order to live a life that is in God's grip.
Yeah, and it's a follow-up to the tests of the counterfeit message, right? So as we're dealing with all these counterfeit messages that hit us, we have to be governed by something. Our choices have to be governed by something. And so he uses some illustrations from the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Love that. And we spent some time looking at what choices or what decisions do we have to make in order to live a life in God's grip, right?
You know, it seems like obviously Jude was a Jewish person and very familiar with Old Testament literature. Obviously, that's all that they grew up with. They were memorizing the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and probably way more than that as well.
For sure.
That's all that they lived through. So Jude is referencing quite a bit. Well, yes, in your first point, it was the way of Cain versus the way of Christ, and that's from Genesis 4, obviously. However, the other two sections that Jude is referencing was from Numbers.
Right.
And this is interesting to me because just before the section of Balaam and Korah is spoken about in Numbers, the author there of Numbers, which we would attribute to Moses, he actually says it is God who leads these people out of Egypt. And earlier in this section of Jude, it was just a couple weeks ago, where he says Jesus led you guys out of Egypt. So he has all these callbacks to Numbers already.
Right.
And within that same section, we're seeing that, connection, this correlation between God and also that messianic view of God, which is Jesus.
For sure.
Super interesting.
Absolutely.
I just happened to wow, okay.
All right.
Yep, let's go
Got
there.
it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Got
you know,
it.
and if you think about Jude being Jesus's brother, right? And he went from an unbelieving brother to that's wanting Jesus to stop doing this and stop teaching, to now he's saying Jesus is God, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what a turn. People often ask, well, how do we know that the Jesus, the resurrection is true and all of that? And obviously it's hard to prove something, right, that happened 2,000 years ago.
Yep.
So you have to take eyewitness accounts. Why would somebody like Jude go from the way he thought about Christ to the way he writes about him, enough so to suffer punishment and torture and death? People will generally won't die for a lie.
Right. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
That's nonsense.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure. So it's just another factor, another pointer to the truth of the resurrection. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Jesus makes the comment, no prophet is even welcomed or honored in his own town. So can you imagine, is like, hey, we're your brothers. We grew up around you. Like that. Yeah.
I know what you were like as a kid.
Right. Wow. That's something. It's funny because, Jeff, you constantly are telling me stories of history, things that happened. And you're like, oh, I knew this person since we were in kindergarten together.
Right.
I knew that guy since he was 5 years old. And that's one of the benefits, actually, of remaining in a region and kind of living in that same region for many years. And that's something I don't often get to experience, is like seeing somebody or how they've changed or grown, for example. I mean, the person that I was 20 years ago, 30 years ago is vastly different from the person I am now.
Yeah.
And you're getting to see and experience people growing up and how they do that. And well, this is what Jude was able to experience with his own brother.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So his whole life. And then for him to Yeah, be totally transformed and changed. A metanoia, a new
Mm-hmm.
way of thinking and acting to say, yeah, this is the Christ. This is
Right.
God in flesh.
And so much so to help lead the church in Jerusalem. Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
amazing.
Absolutely.
But
So let's really hash into this then. We're trying to hone in on the question of the day, which is what are these choices? How are they affecting us? And well, what should we choose in terms of these decisions we need to make in order to live a life that's in God's grip?
yeah, I was struck as I was going through this and coming up with, um, the wordsmithing, if you will. Of, all right, how am I going to frame this and whatnot? And I was just struck with the concept of choice and
Yeah.
how many opportunities throughout a day that we have to choose whether or not we are going to follow the way of Christ or whether we're going to follow the way of Cain,
Yeah.
right? Um, and just this, it's really interesting to me the ramifications that choice have on our lives,
Okay.
right? So I use a little bit on Sunday about the choice of, all right, as I'm driving down the road, am I in a super hurry because I'm trying to get to a certain spot at a certain time and I'm really stressing out about it, and then boom, I get an accident
Yeah.
because I I compromised, right? I made a choice that I'm gonna do this, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden that has ramifications, right?
You're right.
There's outcomes from that. Now I've got a insurance claim. I've got a guy that upset, and now we're late. I'm waiting on the cops. I get a ticket, and now I'm paying higher insurance rates, and all of these things that happen because
Mhm.
of a choice.
Yeah, yeah. You made an interesting remark on Sunday as well, when you said it is often the case that when you make these bad choices, oh my goodness, they will follow you for years. And that's what happened in that case where you have your insurance that is raised for 3 to 5 years from, oh my goodness, one decision that was a split second kind of a decision. You go, okay, I'm not operating under patience and simply rest or peace in this moment.
Right.
I'm going to operate with perhaps my test of sensuality or humility. I'm going to put maybe myself or my hurry above what else is going on, my flesh, and.
Yeah, and we have these choices all day,
Yeah,
every day.
yeah.
How we treat people in our family, whether it's hey, I'm not unless they do this, I'm not going to do this.
Mm,
And you're like, "Well, wait, shouldn't we treat them how we want to be treated regardless of how they treat us?" I mean, they could be the, you know, incredibly mean, rude, whatever,
yeah,
but that's on them. What's on us is what am I going to choose to do? How am I going to choose to operate with that person? And then it's just interesting when I talk to people how they'll make a choice on how to interact with a family member or loved one or whatever. And
hmm,
then that person then receives a certain message out of that and responds to that message,
yeah,
which is in a way that the person wouldn't. So like this person A, puts their needs or their not needs, their desire,
yep,
right? Test of sensuality, by the way,
hmm,
their desire over another person, like say uh, a family member. Hey, I'm going to do this thing instead of going to your celebrating your birthday. I'm going to do my thing
uh-huh,
and not go to your birthday because I want to do this.
right,
Well, then you receive that. Person B receives it like, well, they must not really care about me,
hmm,
right? I must not be important. Whatever that thing is more important than my thing,
clearly,
right?
yeah,
Hey, I'm not going to be in town. I'm going to go on vacation instead of going to your birthday.
yeah,
So my birthday is not important. Okay, message received.
yeah,
And then person A gets upset because person B doesn't make them important. And then they go, well, they're going to have to give more. Otherwise, I'm not going to give more. And it's like, we've
hmm,
made this choice
yeah,
to put ourselves, our wants above the wants, needs, desires of somebody else.
right.
I've made myself more important than you. And now all of a sudden, we have a fractured relationship.
Mm. It seems like that could come from growing weary of doing good for others. Yeah,
Well, it's hard to
yeah,
do good. Like every time you're doing, you do unto others what you would have them do to you, treat
uh-huh,
them the way you want to be treated.
yeah,
Sometimes they still don't treat you the way you want to be treated. But
yep,
that doesn't mean our choice is any different.
You're right. That whole quid pro quo mentality, this for that mentality, or they're not treating me a certain way, so I'm not going to do this mentality. Obviously, those two wrongs don't make a right. You've just expressed a toxic spiral that is just cyclical and it continues. And also, what I'm hearing from that is that victim, villain, victor mentality.
Sure.
Those options, those choices that you have to respond in any certain situation.
Yeah. And it's amazing the idea of choice. And we were talking about it earlier. Like, wouldn't it have been easier just if God would have made us all robots, just not put the tree in and not do all the choice? But choice is important because that's how we know that we're important. That's how we know we're in a relationship.
Yeah.
God doesn't want robots because then there's no choice. If there's no choice, there's no relationship.
Right. Yes, exactly right. Yep.
So my wife had to choose to say yes to my proposal.
Right.
And we both have to choose to treat each other with love and kindness and respect and honor and all of those things. That's when it means something.
Yeah. And that's when it works.
It does. Yeah. When it's when I start putting myself above her.
Yes.
That thing, and she would do the same. Then
you have breakage in a relationship.
Breakage, right.
Absolutely right. So when you mentioned earlier about choosing the way of Cain versus choosing the way of Christ, what you mean by that, or what you're saying by that, is choosing between serving self versus choosing to serve Christ.
Right.
That's pretty much where you're going with that.
Yeah, because Cain, it's evident in that story that God had at some point in time taught them about offerings. Right. We don't know what happened between Genesis 3 and Genesis 4.
Right, or how much time passed or anything.
Right. We don't know we know at least it was 9 months and several years because Cain is at the point where he's pretty much an adult.
Yeah.
Has responsibility and has the ability to bring some type of an offer. Right. He has the ability to do that, and he's strong enough to kill his brother. Yeah. So he's not 5, right?
Right.
We don't know how old he is. So at least a decade or two has happened between Genesis 3 and Genesis 4.
Yeah.
Probably something like that, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps. And so God has instructed them somehow, some way how to do this. And Cain basically said, but I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it what I feel like doing. Because God says, do it right. If you do it right, we're all good.
Yeah.
But you didn't do it right. You brought it on your terms. You didn't bring it on my terms.
Right. Yeah. Why are you so upset about this, right? If you continue to do what is right, won't we be, like you said, on good terms and have that reconciliation? It is interesting, the difference between a grain offering and a blood offering, and we don't need to really get into the minutia there, but the blood offering was always in a place of a sacrifice for atonement, for forgiveness, for reconciliation, whereas a grain offering was most often in the place of thanksgiving or gratitude for something.
Right.
And so perhaps through the breakage of sin that happened with the fall, there needed to be some reconciliation and the atonement that needed to happen. Something had to die for that reconciliation for the relationship.
And generally, when you look at how they were, the order, the grain offering comes after the blood offering, right?
Yeah.
So I can't really go into a relationship and commune, if you will, with God, thankfulness and all that, until I've dealt with the thing that's blocking our relationship. It's like if you and your wife are in a fight, you guys are in an argument, you had a knockdown drag out. You can't all of a sudden be intimate with her until you've cleared up the breakage, right? Until you say, oh man, you know what, I blew it here, whatever. And then intimacy can come. Well, God's the same way. You can't have that intimacy with God until you deal with the breakage.
Yeah.
So it's not that the grain offering or the offering of the from the fruit of the land was a bad thing. It was out of order. It was done without first acknowledging the need for atonement of sin through blood, right?
Yeah.
So he basically said, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it, God, and you're going to be happy with that. So violates authority, right? That test of authority we talked about, because all of a sudden Cain makes himself authority. Now contrast that with Jesus. right? So Jesus comes, he says, I didn't come to serve or to be served, but to serve.
Yes.
And in the garden, he says, not my will, but your will. I really don't want to do this, but it's not about what I want to do.
So you're right. In that the way of Cain, quote unquote, type of a thing there. Yes, there's that test of the authority, right? Who's the decision maker here? Whose will do I follow? Is it my decision making, or is it God's? The way that God wants it to be done, or my way that I want it to be done? There's also the test of humility that happens right there too, because instead of being repentant when God says, "Hey, don't be upset, just do the right things and we're going to be okay," he could have been repentant, he could have been humble, but instead he got angry and jealous and prideful.
Right. Yeah. And ends up killing his brother. Like, all right, I'll give you a blood sacrifice, God. Here, take this. It's like, I mean, I often wonder, there's two things in Genesis 3 and in Genesis 4. I often wonder, what would have happened if Adam and Eve, when God said, hey, who told you you're naked? What's going on? If they'd have just owned it. Like, right. Adam says, hey, that woman you gave me.
Right.
So he's blaming God for this sin. Think about it. The woman you gave me, right? Yeah. It's your fault, right? And then what's Eve say? Well, the serpent. What if they both would have went, we blew it.
Right.
And here, what if, when God says, why are you so angry? Do this. What if Cain would have went, oh, you're right. Let me go back to Abel. Let me see if I could get one of the sheep there and let me do this all over again. What would have happened?
It's a mystery. I've thought about that a lot as well. You're so right.
Well, God probably would have, with repentance, God would have forgave, right? Because it's what he does. He's a loving, forgiving God. And we wouldn't have the Cain and Abel story.
A lot would be changed, for sure.
Right.
We don't even know if we would be here, actually, but who knows what history would be.
But it's just this power of choice that we have.
Yeah.
And what is it that is guiding, or what is it that is the basis on which we are choosing?
Right.
Are we choosing because of ourself, or are we choosing what God's wanting to do? And that's the way of Cain versus the way of Christ.
Yeah. The next point you had was the lie of Balaam versus the truth of Christ. You also had the death of Korah versus the life of Christ. So we've got two other choices here. So the lie of Balaam, perhaps that would presume that there are options out there.
Yeah, because Balaam basically was trying to find options to get what he wanted. He wanted the money.
He wanted money and honor.
Right?
Yeah.
He wanted, for sure, fame and fortune, everything that goes with it, right?
Yeah.
So he started off with the option, well, okay, God kind of said I can go, but had to be a certain way. But he said I can go, so I'm going to go. And then at the end, when God wouldn't give him the curse to curse the people, he says, well, I've got another way to accomplish this. I'm going to lead the people astray. And then the Israelites had a choice. Yes. They could have stood up and said, no, we just had the whole calf thing. Mm-hmm. We're not doing this.
Yep, absolutely. The Lord has told them time and time again, when you go out among the other people, don't intermarry among them, lest perchance you are diluted, right, in your faith and your religion. And yes, that's what happened to them time and time and time again.
So the lie is, well, there's lots of options out there. Just do whatever you feel like doing.
Sure.
No. Jesus is the way.
Right.
The truth.
It's either Yahweh or your way.
Right.
Yeah. So then we have the death of Korah and Korah's rebellion. The 250 chiefs of that time plus Korah. So it was certain families that had said, they said to Moses, oh, you're speaking out of turn here. We don't agree with what you're doing. This is too much. We want to approach God this way, and we're going to do it this way.
Right. Yeah. They rejected God's authority by rejecting the person that God had placed in authority. If you remember, Moses did not want this gig.
Right.
God says, no, I want you to do this. This is you're going to do this, right? And so this isn't something that Moses put himself into. Mm-hmm. This is something that God put Moses in. And so by them challenging or them rejecting Moses' authority, they're actually rejecting God's authority.
Right.
And I think it's really popular in today's culture to really challenge all authority and assume that authority is bad
Yeah.
or needs to be challenged, and then we put ourselves in front of it, not realizing the Bible says that, look, the authority are put there by God. You got to at least respect them. Now you can disagree. I'm not saying you can't disagree, but you've got to have some honor and you've got to have respect, because that's God's authority structure.
Yeah. There's something that is said in that story of Korah that always strikes me, because people don't assume that God acts this way. When they ask, and I'm going to say the quote, it's, "Shall one man sin and you be angry with the whole congregation?" This is a challenging verse, actually, because there actually are many accounts where one person sins and or does something wrong, and their entire family or even tens of thousands of other people get wiped out or are plagued or burnt up to a crisp because of one person's thing.
Well, look what happens in Joshua, right? The second battle after Jericho. God says,
Yeah.
don't take any stuff. And
Yep.
Achan, right?
Achan.
He says they won't miss that. They won't miss
Yeah.
any. Well, guess what? All those they lose the battle, and
Right.
tons of people die
30,000 people. Yeah.
because this one guy, right? Because the choices we make, they're not just our choices. The choices we make have ramifications and have ripple effects to other people as far as breakage goes.
Yeah.
And in that same story with Korah, God says, "Hey, get away from these people, because if not, you're going to get swallowed up too," right? And so the earth opens up. Pretty cool science fiction thing that would probably happen, right? Earth opens up, swallows these people, and if you're around them, you got swallowed up too.
Yeah. Ooh,
and
there's a message there.
Culture will take us down this road that leads to a Korah-like death, a death that is more wrathful, right? Korah's death was the wrath of God. We like being in New Testament. We like the reward of God a lot. And we like to think, well, God's no longer wrathful since Jesus, his wrath doesn't exist. Oh no, God's the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Exactly.
He's the same in Old Testament as he is in New Testament. He was as forgiving in the Old Testament as he is in the New Testament, and he's as wrathful in the New Testament as he is in the Old Testament. He cannot and he will not let sin go unpunished. It won't happen.
Right.
So what message or what choice are you going to make? Are you going to go down the road of Korah and the death of Korah, which will end up being in wrath, or are you going to go down the road of Christ, where the death of Christ is reward?
Exactly.
It's a banquet with him.
Yeah, life eternal.
All eternal, right? We have these choices. I mean, it's just over. What do you choose?
Right. Wow. Yeah. And like Joshua says, right? For me and my family, right?
We're going to serve the Lord. Y'all do what y'all want to do.
Yeah. That's pretty much how it always comes down to, right?
And then in Judges, the key phrase in the book of Judges, right after Joshua, is everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Yep.
Fine. As Paul says in Romans, then God's going to give you up to that. Here you go.
Yep.
And you're going to be dealing with the ramifications, this idea of folly. Wisdom is the right application of knowledge, right? That, hey, I know this to be true. I'm going to rest in that. I'm going to apply that. Or I'm going to go, no, thank you. And I'm going to follow all these other things. And that's folly, or it's foolishness.
Yep. Absolutely.
What do you choose today?
Right.
Wisdom or folly?
The danger as well is that when you choose the way of folly, you're then given over to that debased mind, and then you think what you're doing is true and right and good, or the right way. But that's the sinful nature. That's like the subterfuge of it. That's what's scary about it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it takes humility to say, oh, maybe my ways aren't the right ways. And maybe I need to humble myself before the Lord and follow his way. Yeah.
And authority. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Who gets to make the plans here? Who gets to make the schedule here? Who's running the show? Me or God? Am I going what feels best here? What serves the flesh, or am I going with what serves the Lord?
Yep.
And then when I am confronted with something that's not in alignment with God as the authority in his way, do I change or do I make God change?
Yikes. We better change. I'll say that. So, wow, what a great episode. Just jam packed with some awesome information here as we were discussing, again, 3 different decisions that we need to make in order to live a life that is within God's grip.
Yep.
And so, this was just once more the way of Cain versus the way of Christ, which is like saying, okay, am I going to choose to serve self, sensuality, or am I going to serve Christ? And that's the way of humility and other centeredness, sacrificial. The lie of Balaam versus the truth of Christ. And so that's presuming that there are other options out there. Perhaps I can find different ways to get to God, or maybe I can take this route, this route, this route. But no, okay, let's actually follow God's authority and God's will. It's your will, not mine. And then the death of Korah versus the life of Christ. So making foolish presumptions of what God has ordained, and saying, okay, I'm just going to do whatever I want, or I'm going to... That can't be right because I don't think it's right, so I'm going to do what I think is the best way. Yeah. So we have these choices to make, and the danger, again, is that the outcomes of those choices aren't just on us. They actually have an effect that is greater than one singular person.
And for longer than one singular moment in time. It tends to be the gift that keeps on giving when you make a poor decision.
Yeah, that is so true. Perhaps the gift is the wisdom and experience and knowledge that is gained through making those mistakes and errors.
If you learn from them.
Yeah, right. So good. Well, thank you once again for joining me today. Another week in the books here, episode 18. Yes. Thank you.
All right.
Yep. We'll see you guys next week. Overflow podcast. And this coming Sunday, we're back. It's going to be 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
A Sober Reality is the title of this coming week's sermon.
Jude just keeps on swinging.
Exactly. Get ready for it, guys. We'll see you then. Have a great day.
Have a great day.